So you find people complaining about, the long hours, feeling unappreciated. They have like too big of things to do. The to-do list is way too long and it's another late night at your desk. And sometimes you get to a place where you realize that, yeah, this is actually not working at all.
What gets very interesting is when you actually don't feel it's like depressive or negative, and you've just outpaced yourself in that organization. At times, the organization itself can feel too small for you, and you're like, you know what, I need to get out of here and explore a little bit more in my career.
Yeah, so if you're feeling stuck or demotivated or maybe just plain exhausted, today we're finding out exactly, when it's time to move on. And we're finding out the signs that it's time to move on from your particular workplace. This is In the Cubicle, and we're chatting to Thando Mncube, HR specialist, about this. Thando, it's always a pleasure to have you. How are you doing?
Very well, thanks to yourself. Hi, Palesa and Ben.
Doing great. Thank you so much. We complain a lot. People complain a lot about work, but it's not all bad, is it?
It's not always all bad, and I think sometimes it's just human nature to complain, not because you want to leave, but more as an outlet, which also to the topic doesn't necessarily mean it's time to leave.
Yeah, that's so true. And, a lot of the times when we have conversations about work, like here on the show as well, we try and find out how to make things better. And that's how it is, right? We're trying to maybe climb a particular career, climb up the ladder, reach your particular career goals, and get to a particular place from the work environment, but also financially. However, that's not all there is to the work environment.
It really isn't. And I think one of the things that is important to consider is many of us enter corporate and believe that we must climb the corporate ladder. But sometimes, certain people are comfortable with where they're at. And I think that's the first thing that we need to think about is, am I in this rat race because it's what I want and it's what energizes me? Or am I doing this because I was told that the only way to progress in life is to get more promotions or get a more senior position in my job? I think a lot of our exhaustion comes from doing things that we believe society expects from us, but not necessarily the things that we feel are important or aligned with our own purpose in life.
Many times, in fact, just earlier we were speaking about how we might be on like autopilot with a lot of our friendships and or our relationships. And work is also one of the relationships that we have, right? So how do we know that we're actually not paying enough attention to how we're feeling in that work environment?
I think one of the signs will be burnout, but and I mean we talk a lot about burnout. A lot of the time, people don't realize they're burnt out until their body actually collapses. So I think the first step is actually taking the time to learn and understand your own body, understand when you're tired. An example is you'll find yourself driving home and you don't even know how you got there because you're so stuck in your head about the stresses and the things that are happening at work that you're not present in the. I think another good indicator, telltale sign, is the people around you. In my own personal experience, I found that when work is consuming me beyond what is comfortable, my daughter will be the first person to say, "Ma'am, you need to, come back and be
That's
present
cute.
and be with me. Don't they know you have a daughter?" So that's a big telltale sign for me as
Well,
well.
well, I like that. That's a healthy indicator, isn't it?
100%.
And let's talk a little bit about that because people stay in spaces of familiarity because of that. It's comfortable, it's easy to navigate, the people, but also maybe you have that little fear of exploring the unknown. How do you know actually that, what, this is me? It's not even the workplace. I'm the one to blame for this.
So I think one of the things is, have you done everything that you can to make your work more engaging? A lot of the times, we put a lot of responsibility on the employer to make our experience great. And we tend to be a little bit passive and sit back and, to your point, Palisa, complain about everything that's not happening. But I think a big part is, have you done the things that you need to do, whether it's development, whether it's getting involved in other initiatives in the workplace, whether it's putting your hand up for other, projects or that kind of thing. And if you've done all of those things and still feel like I'm not happy here, then maybe it is time to look at something different. I think another way to look at it is when you are bored,
Yeah.
right? If you wake up in the morning and there's nothing that you are challenged by in your job, that is also another
Sure.
indicator that maybe it's time for something different, because familiarity breeds contempt, and that contempt is when people start being toxic, because you've got too much time on your hands. You've got time for the gossip and for all of these unproductive things that we end up doing when we've got too much time on our hands.
Yeah, let's pick about that people factor, because at times people have the wrong types of relationships in the workplace, and they might be in a very good environment that's healthy for them and their career trajectory. But it's the people in that environment that's making them feel exhausted, that's making them feel like I'm in an unhealthy environment. How do you navigate that strife?
I think we can't forget that people leave managers, usually the managers, and not the organization. And that's one of the things, anyone that has come to me and had that conversation, you need to be able to take a step back and understand, firstly, is there a way for me to be successful in this space despite this person? And secondly, what is the impact on my mental health of this relationship? I think when it comes to the people, I'm a firm believer that we go to work, not to make friends, but friendships may come out of work. But if you approach it with that intent to say, I'm not here to make friends, but I'm here to work with people who are aiming for the same outcome, then you're less likely to be affected by, not being friendly with certain people. Again, like I said, not at the extent of, or at the expense rather, of your mental health. I think that comes first, and making sure that you are still able to, be healthy, that you're not going home feeling abused or bullied, um, makes it okay to not necessarily be friends with the people in the workplace.
Thando, we're obviously not speaking in a vacuum here. We know that there aren't any jobs. So people can be
Mhm.
feeling demotivated, stuck, and, all those things. But they're like, if I move on, where am I moving on to? Because I look around me and the majority of people don't actually have work. So am I going to be putting myself in a terrible position if I decide to move on?
So I think there are two kind of paths that a person can take. The one is, if you're lucky enough to find alternative employment, which we know is in South Africa and on the continent as a whole is not something that is big, then go with that option. The second is to start your own side hustle, right? If you are entrepreneurially inclined. I know not everybody is entrepreneurially inclined,
Yeah.
but if you have that opportunity and you've got that desire to start your own thing, that's another way where you can combat this of um, lack of engagement in your job. But I think the third, which is probably more realistic for most people, is to find other ways outside of work to augment or to fill your cup, right? So if you know you've
Ah,
got to do this job 8 hours a day, you don't have a choice. Literally look at it like that. It's 8 hours of my day, but I'm going to spend 2 hours at the end of my day
yeah.
doing something that actually fills my cup. And that is the energy that you then take into the workplace to sustain you when you're
Okay.
not really feeling engaged.
Okay, let's take a break, Tando. We'll be back with this conversation after this.
Darubini ya Afrika na I am Henry Shakif.
Hawa wa Afrika Kusini wenye asili ya kizungu ambao wamepewa ukimbizi huko nchini Marekani. Je, nini chanzo cha wao kuomba ukimbizi nchini Marekani?
Wenyewe hawajaomba ukimbizi. Kuna shirika fulani inaitwa AfriForum, shirika mbili za wazungu ambao wanatetea haki ya wazungu hapa, AfriForum na Solidarity. Hao walienda Marekani kufanya kampeni kusema kwamba wazungu wananyanyaswa hapa Afrika Kusini, na walivyofanya hiyo kampeni, serikali iweza kuwafuatilia kujua nini ambacho mnasema kwamba mnanyanyaswa.
Kuna namna ya wao kwamba wamepoteza uraia wa Afrika Kusini, na je, endapo Trump akamaliza muda wake madarakani, uhalali wao wa kuishi nchini Marekani ukoje?
Itakuwa vigumu, kifupi itakuwa vigumu wenyewe kupoteza uraia wao.
Darubini ya Afrika 11 kamili hadi 12 kamili majira ya Afrika ya Kati.
Hey, you're listening to In the Cubicle. This is our feature where we try to help you navigate the workplace. And today we're speaking to our guest, Thando Mncube, who's an HR specialist on, sometimes you feel like, nah, man, I've reached the end of this part of my career. How do I move on? Maybe you're feeling stuck, demotivated, maybe exhausted. How do you explore new opportunities in that? Thando is helping us on that matter. Let's speak on the house to start, because we've really exhausted the idea of being exhausted in your workplace. But when do you start initiating that change? Because most of the time we wait for opportunities to come to us, but life doesn't work that way.
I think as soon as you start feeling some of those dejection, so if waking up on Monday is the worst thing you can think about, like I said, if you feel bored, if there's absolutely nothing that excites you about your work, I think that's a good indicator that it's time to start. On the other hand, or the maybe more negative side, when you fear going to work, so let alone being bored, but to your point, Benjamin,
Sure.
when the relationships you have at work are starting to really affect how you show up in your private life, I think, again, that's another sign that it is time to look for something different. As I mentioned, something different might not necessarily be leaving the organization.
Yeah.
It might be adding things to fill your cup. It might be doing new projects. It might be things like job enrichment, where, yes, this is my role, but I'm also going to spend an hour maybe making posters or doing graphic design for the organization, so that I'm still finding things that are engaging me to stay in the organization.
And moving on is a difficult initiative to make by yourself. I want us to speak about, okay, where do I start with this? Do I just start opening a LinkedIn account? Do I start speaking to my networks? Where do you start saying, I'm moving on now? And what should be that first point of action be?
I think if your first point of action is only at that point, you're already late. I believe that anyone that is in a career and wants to continue working should constantly be keeping that network warm. So things like having a LinkedIn page are
Yeah.
almost non-negotiable for me. From the moment you graduate and you start working, I think that's one of the things you need to keep there, because sometimes opportunities will find you because you are available. Similar with your network. I think probably 2 or 3 of the jobs that I've gotten in my career have been not necessarily because I'm looking, but because I'm constantly engaging with my network, whether it's on social media like LinkedIn, or just having conversations with people about the things that I like to do, the things that I'm doing at work. I think it is very difficult if you're coming from a cold place where you've done absolutely nothing in terms of your own profile in what you do. It is definitely going to be harder. So my advice is, even you're happy, already start preparing yourself for what could possibly come.
Thando, many a times in the beginning of a new job, we feel that fulfillment and we feel that excitement again. And sometimes that could just be the problem. You could just be bored and uninspired. So you say you want to move on, you find a new job, you go there, you're inspired, you're happy again. And then you find, that the same things that happened at your previous place are going to be happening again.
Who's the problem? Is it you at the workplace?
Exactly. That's what I'm trying to figure out. How do you know that you're actually the problem?
So I think there's 2 things to mention. The one is corporate is corporate. It's the same stuff in a different color. And that's one of the things we need to be aware of. It doesn't matter where you go, for as long as you're working in an organization with people, there's going to be politics, there's going to be people dynamics, there's going to be a level of bureaucracy, there's going to be all of those things. Unless you start your own company, you just need to accept that no matter where I go, these are some of the things I'm going to deal with. Not taking away that some workspaces are more toxic than others, but the reality is you'll find these things everywhere. I think, however, if you are unable to stay in one place for 3 to 6 months and you're constantly, not managing to gel, then you might be the problem. Like I mentioned earlier, not all of us are built for the corporate world. Not all of us are built for that rat race. And maybe you do need to step back and ask yourself, what is it that I should be doing with my life? And is this the best way for me to go about it? Oftentimes we as people don't give each other that feedback. But if you're lucky enough to have people that will give you feedback, actually ask, when you move on from one job to the next, ask the people that you're leaving about their experience of you, because that's the only way you'll know if the problem is you or if there's an actual issue in a workplace.
Yeah, I like that you spoke something very profound earlier on. Is like, don't think about moving on when the rough time comes. You said, start searching, thinking about how you brand yourself, how you put yourself out there when you are in happy moments in the workplace, because I think that's profound what you said, because most of the time we wait for the negatives to be pronounced in our lives before we move on. How important is that, always engaging and reflecting on your career, even in the good and the different seasons of your life?
I think it's important because it keeps you nimble. It keeps you on your feet. If you think about it as from a sports perspective, so I played netball, right? And it's very hard to pivot if you're flat-footed. But if you're constantly on your toes, it's easier when an opportunity comes or when you want to move for you to pivot because you're on your toes, you're nimble, you're agile, and you're ready to move. So I think it is critical to constantly be, even from a skills perspective, checking what skills are hot in my environment at the moment. What skills do I need to be learning right now to make me employable in the future? If I qualified as, say, an industrial psychologist 10 years ago, what industrial psychologists are doing today is very different to what I learned in university. So just for me to remain relevant, both in my current role and to move, it's very important that you're constantly engaging with what's out there. Look at job profiles to understand what does my next role require of me if I'm looking to grow vertically as an into a more senior role. What are the requirements for jobs in general at that senior role, and constantly be working towards filling up your toolkit with those tools that you'll need or those skills that you'll need to move forward.
All right, we'll have to wrap it up there, Thando. I think we've got a great bunch of advice, especially because, it's not always the workplace that's the problem. Sometimes it is us, and we do need to do more reflecting and leave that autopilot mode and really look at, how we fit in and what we want to be like in the future of our job. So thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to chat to you, and we appreciate your time this morning.
Thank you, Palesa. Thank you, Ben.
Do you have socials?
I do. You can follow me at Miss T Mncube on Instagram. That is where you can engage with me. On LinkedIn, look for Thando Mncube, and that is again where you can engage with me.
All right. Mncube is Mncube for those who certainly want to follow Thando right now. That's HR specialist Thando Mncube chatting to us about signs that it might be time to move on from your job that is in the cubicle. It's 10:30 Central Africa time. Let's bring back Fikile Lingwati for our latest sports news.